In the farthest reaches of the Andromeda sector, where three galaxy arms converge in a cosmic dance of stars and darkness, lies a truth that will shatter everything you think you know about human ingenuity. For 700 years, the Valtherian Empire has ruled over 43 star systems with technology so advanced it appears as magic to lesser civilizations. Their royal family, blessed with psychic abilities that can bend matter itself, has never known defeat or weakness. Until now, Princess Zarathustra, heir to the most powerful throne in known space, has been trapped in her own body for 3 agonizing years. Her mind remains sharp as a plasma blade, but her limbs refuse to obey. The greatest doctors, the most skilled healers, and the most advanced medical technology in the Empire have all failed her. She lies in her crystalline palace, watching her kingdom slowly crumble as enemies circle like hungry void sharks. But in the grimy corridors of a human salvage ship, covered in engine grease and speaking a language the Empire considers primitive, works someone who might just hold the key to the impossible. Jake Morrison doesn't know he's about to change the fate of an entire civilization. He's just trying to fix a broken hyperdrive with duct tape and determination. What happens when human stubbornness meets alien desperation? When jury-rigged solutions clash with centuries of refined technology? When a species known for making it work somehow encounters a problem that defies the laws of physics themselves? The answer will echo across the stars and prove that sometimes the most sophisticated problems require the most beautifully simple solutions. The rusty comet wheezed through space like an old man climbing stairs, its hull patched with 17 different types of metal and held together by what Jake Morrison called aggressive optimism. The salvage ship had been his home for 6 years, ever since he'd bought it with his last credits, and a promise to pay the rest when business picked up. Business had picked up exactly once, when they found a derelict Martian cruiser, but Jake had spent most of that windfall fixing the hyperdrive again. Jake wiped his hands on a rag that had once been white, but now resembled a geological survey of every engine he'd ever worked on. His coveralls bore the permanent stains of someone who believed that if something was worth fixing, it was worth getting dirty for. At 32, he had the weathered hands of a man twice his age and the stubborn optimism of someone who'd made impossible repairs work through sheer bloody-mindedness. "Jake, you need to see this," called Mira-chan from the bridge. Her voice carried that particular tone that meant either incredible luck or terrible danger, and in their line of work, those two things were often the same. He grabbed his toolkit and made his way through the ship's narrow corridors, stepping over the usual collection of spare parts, empty coffee containers, and technical manuals held together with tape and hope. The rusty comet wasn't much to look at, but it had gotten him out of more scrapes than Jake cared to count. Mira sat at the communications console, her dark hair tied back in the practical ponytail of someone who'd learned that loose hair and spinning machinery didn't mix. She'd been Jake's partner for 4 years, joining him after her merchant family had gone bankrupt, and she needed somewhere to rebuild her life. Where Jake fixed things, Mira made them profitable. "What VE you got?" Jake asked, settling into the pilot's chair that groaned ominously under his weight. "Emergency beacon," Mira said, her fingers dancing over the controls. "But it's not like anything in our databases. The encryption is, well, I've never seen anything like it. It's broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't even be possible with standard tech." Jake frowned. In 6 years of salvage work, they'd responded to their share of distress calls. Most were routine. Cargo haulers with failed engines, pleasure craft that had wandered too far from shipping lanes, occasionally a research vessel that had gotten too curious about something dangerous. But unknown encryption meant unknown technology, and unknown technology meant either a big payday or a quick trip to the afterlife. "Any idea who sent it?" he asked. "That's the weird part," Mira said, pulling up a star chart. "The signal is coming from the Veil Nebula, the restricted zone." Jake's blood chilled. The Veil Nebula was marked on every star chart with warnings in 12 languages, all variations of "do not enter" and extreme danger. It had been off-limits to human ships for over 2 centuries, ever since the first explorers had vanished without a trace. The few automated probes that had made it back reported energy readings that defied known physics and massive structures that couldn't possibly exist. Could be a trap, Jake said, though his curiosity was already fighting with his common sense. Could be, Mira agreed. Or it could be the score we've been waiting for. Look at these energy readings, Jake. Whatever's sending this signal is powered by technology that makes our best fusion reactors look like candles. Jake studied the data streaming across the screens. Mira was right. The energy signatures were off the charts. Even a small piece of technology that advanced could set them up for life. But the Veil Nebula had swallowed ships far better than the Rusty Comet. There's something else, Mira said quietly. I ran the signal through every translation protocol we have. Most of it is gibberish, but there's one part that came through clear. She paused, her finger hovering over the playback control. It's a medical emergency. Jake closed his eyes. He'd been a salvage operator long enough to know that medical emergencies in space were usually fatal long before help could arrive. But the idea of someone dying while he debated the risks didn't sit well with him. His father had been a search and rescue pilot before the cancer took him, and some lessons ran deeper than common sense. How long to reach the signal's origin? He asked. 18 hours at full burn, Mira said. But, Jake, if we're wrong about this, then we'll be wrong together, Jake said, settling back in his chair. Besides, when has playing it safe ever gotten us anywhere? Mira smiled despite herself. It was true. Their biggest successes had come from taking chances that any reasonable person would have avoided. Plotting course now. And Jake, maybe we should check our insurance before we leave normal space. What insurance? Jake asked with a grin that didn't entirely hide his nerves. The Rusty Comet turned toward the Veil Nebula, its patched hull reflecting the strange aurora light that danced along the nebula's edges. Jake spent the next few hours running diagnostics on every system twice, knowing that whatever they were flying into would test every jury-rigged repair he'd ever made. As they approached the nebula's outer edge, the ship's sensors began picking up readings that made no sense. Space itself seemed to be twisted here, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. The normal background radiation of space was replaced by something that felt almost like music, if music could be made from the vibration of reality itself. Jake, Mira said, her voice tight with concentration. The signal's getting stronger, but it's also changing. It's like it's responding to our approach. Responding how? It's synchronizing with our engine frequency. Look at this. Every time our hyperdrive cycles, the signal pulses in perfect harmony. Jake frowned at the readings. In his experience, technology that seemed too smart usually was. But the medical emergency beacon continued its desperate call, and something about its urgency felt genuine. They passed through the nebula's outer boundary, and the Rusty Comet's hull began to resonate with energies that registered on instruments Jake didn't even recognize. The ship's lights flickered, and for a moment, Jake could swear he felt something vast and ancient take notice of their presence. There, Mira breathed, pointing at the main display. Through the swirling gases of the nebula, a structure emerged that defied every assumption Jake had ever made about space architecture. It was a palace, but one built from materials that seemed to shift between solid matter and pure light. Crystalline spires twisted impossibly upward, connected by bridges that appeared to be made from captured starlight itself. The entire structure pulsed with a rhythm that matched the emergency beacon. My God, Jake whispered. What is that place? According to our scans, it's generating enough power to run a small star, Mira said, her fingers flying over the controls. Jake, this isn't just alien technology. This is something so far beyond human engineering that we don't even have words for what we're looking at. As they drew closer, the palace's impossible architecture became even more apparent. Towers that should have collapsed under their own weight hung in space like frozen music, and gardens filled with plants that glowed with their own inner light dotted the structure's surface. It was beautiful in a way that made Jake's chest ache with something between wonder and fear. The beacon's coming from the central spire, Mira reported. But, Jake, I'm reading massive defensive systems. If whoever lives here doesn't want visitors, only one way to find out, Jake said, opening a communication channel. Unknown station. This is the salvage vessel Rusty Comet responding to your emergency beacon. Do you require assistance? The response came immediately, but not in any language Jake recognized. The voice was musical, with harmonics that seemed to resonate in his bones. But underneath the alien cadence, he could hear something unmistakable: desperation. Mira, are you getting any of this? The translation matrix is struggling, but wait. There's another signal, much weaker. It's in standard galactic trade language. A new voice came through the speakers, rougher than the first, but speaking in accented English. Human vessel, you must not have received the warnings. This space is forbidden to your kind. Leave now, for your own safety. We're responding to a medical emergency, Jake said. If someone needs help, the help you could provide. The voice paused, and Jake heard what sounded like an argument in the background. No, it is impossible. Your technology is too primitive, your understanding too limited. Leave this place before the Queen's Guard arrives. Jake looked at Mira, who shrugged. In their years together, they developed a communication system based mostly on raised eyebrows and shared glances. This particular look meant your call, but we've come this far. Look, Jake said into the communicator, I don't know what kind of medical emergency you're dealing with, but I've been fixing impossible things for my entire adult life. Maybe our technology is primitive, but sometimes primitive is exactly what you need. Sometimes you don't need the most advanced solution. You just need one that works. Silence stretched across the communication channel for so long that Jake began to wonder if they'd been cut off. Finally, the voice returned, heavy with what sounded like exhaustion. You would risk your lives to help someone you have never met? Someone not even of your own species. That's generally how medical emergencies work, Jake said. We don't usually stop to check species compatibility before we help. Another long pause, then dock at the lower spire. You'll be met by an escort. But be warned, human, what you see here must never be spoken of to your authorities. The peace between our peoples depends on certain boundaries being maintained. As the Rusty Comet approached the docking spire, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were crossing more than just a physical threshold. Whatever lay ahead would change everything he thought he knew about humanity's place in the universe. The docking bay that opened to receive them was larger than most space stations Jake had visited, lined with materials that seemed to absorb and reflect light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. As the Rusty Comet settled onto the landing platform with its usual collection of mechanical complaints, Jake grabbed his toolkit and turned to Mira. Ready for another impossible job? With you. Mira smiled. Always. The airlock cycled with a sound like singing crystal, and Jake Morrison stepped into a world that redefined his understanding of possible. The corridor beyond was formed from what appeared to be living light, walls that pulsed with soft bioluminescence, and floors that felt solid despite being completely transparent. Through them, Jake could see vast chambers filled with impossible geometries and creatures that moved like liquid starlight. Beside him, Mira whispered something that might have been a prayer in 3 different languages. Their escort waited just beyond the airlock, a tall, elegant being with skin that shifted between silver and deep blue, wearing robes that seemed to be cut from the fabric of space itself. Its eyes held depths that spoke of centuries of experience, and when it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that Jake felt in his chest. I am Kelfar, first physician to the royal house. The being said, its accent strange but understandable. You are the humans who answered our call. Jake Morrison, Jake said, hefting his toolkit. This is my partner, Mira Chun. We're here about your medical emergency. Kelfar studied them with an expression that might have been amusement on a human face. You carry tools for mechanical repair to treat a medical condition that has baffled the greatest minds in the Empire for 3 years. Sometimes medical problems need mechanical solutions, Jake said. Sometimes the simplest approach is the one nobody's tried because it seems too obvious. Indeed, Kelthvar turned and began walking down the corridor at a pace that forced Jake and Mira to hurry to keep up. Tell me, human Jake Morrison, what do you know of neural interfaces? Enough to know they're usually more trouble than they're worth, Jake replied. Too many moving parts, too many ways for the connection to go wrong. Why? Because our patient's condition involves technology integrated so deeply with her biology that they cannot be separated. Every attempt to treat one has resulted in damage to the other. They passed through a series of chambers that defied physics in ways that made Jake's engineering mind ache. Staircases that led up became staircases that led down without any apparent transition. Gardens grew in zero gravity, their roots extending into what looked like solid crystal. And everywhere, beings of impossible beauty moved with the fluid grace of creatures born to live among the stars. This is the Valtherian Empire, Kelthvar explained, noticing their stares. We have ruled this sector for 700 of your years, maintaining peace through strength and wisdom. Our technology is integrated with our biology from birth, enhancing our natural psychic abilities to levels that allow us to shape matter and energy through will alone. Impressive, Mira said. But if your technology is so advanced, why do you need us? Kelthvar stopped before a pair of doors that looked like they were made from crystallized music. Because sometimes advancement can become a limitation. Our solutions are elegant, refined, perfect, and utterly incapable of addressing a problem that requires, how do you humans put it, thinking outside the box. The doors opened to reveal a chamber that took Jake's breath away. The room was vast, with walls that seemed to extend into infinity, filled with equipment that hummed with barely contained power. Holographic displays showed readouts in languages Jake couldn't begin to understand, and the air itself felt charged with energies that made his skin tingle. But at the center of it all, lying on what appeared to be a bed made from solidified light, was someone who changed everything Jake thought he knew about beauty and tragedy. Princess Zarati HYSS looked like she had been carved from living starlight. Her skin held depths like the space between galaxies, and her hair moved as though underwater, despite the absence of any current. She was clearly alien, but her features held a harmony that spoke to something universal about grace and intelligence. Her eyes, when they opened to look at the newcomers, held depths that suggested centuries of experience compressed into features that looked barely 20 in human terms. She is 147 of your years old, Kelthvar said, reading Jake's expression. In her people's terms, barely adult. She has been heir to the throne for 30 years and was considered one of the most promising psychic talents of her generation. Until 3 years ago, Jake approached the bed cautiously, his engineers automatically cataloging the equipment surrounding the princess. Life support systems that looked more like works of art, monitoring devices that seemed to read thoughts as easily as heartbeats, and, underlying it all, a network of crystalline filaments that connected to the princess through what looked like neural ports at the base of her skull. What happened to her? Mira asked softly. The princess's eyes moved to focus on Mira, and when she spoke, her voice was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The words were in her own language, but somehow Jake understood the meaning, a plea for help that transcended language barriers. She was inspecting our newest warship when there was an accident, Kelthvar explained. An experimental neural interface designed to allow direct mental control of ship systems. The interface was damaged during a pirate attack, and when the princess tried to use it to defend the ship, the feedback surge damaged her nervous system in ways we cannot repair. Jake knelt beside the bed, studying the neural ports more closely. The technology was incredibly advanced, but the damage was obvious even to his untrained eye. The crystalline connections were fractured, creating interference patterns that probably scrambled any signal trying to pass through them. Have you tried bypassing the damaged connections? He asked. Of course, Kelthvar said, a touch of irritation in his voice. We have attempted every possible surgical technique, Every form of neural regeneration therapy, even experimental treatments that required us to partially phase her body into subspace. Nothing has worked. What about replacing the interface entirely? Impossible. The interface is grown, not manufactured. It integrates with the subject's biology over months of careful cultivation. To remove it would require removing portions of her brainstem. Jake studied the equipment for several minutes, his mind automatically breaking down the problem into components he could understand. Neural interface, damaged connections, signal interference. It was like dealing with a computer that had fried circuit boards, except the computer was integrated with a living person. The connections are crystal-based, he said finally. And crystals can be retuned, right? You don't need to replace them. You need to find a way to work around the interference. The interference patterns are too chaotic, Kelthvar protested. We have tried every harmonic frequency in our databases. Jake grinned. That's your problem right there. You're thinking like scientists. Sometimes you don't need the perfect frequency. You just need one that's close enough. He opened his toolkit and pulled out what looked like the least impressive device in the room. A simple signal amplifier he'd jury-rigged from spare parts to boost weak communication signals. It was held together with electrical tape and optimism, and next to the elegant Valtherian technology, it looked like something a child might build from scraps. You want to connect that to neural interface technology that took centuries to develop? Kelthvar asked, incredulous. The principle is the same, Jake said, already examining the interface connections. You got a signal that's not getting through because of interference. I've got a device that takes weak signals and makes them stronger while filtering out noise. It's not elegant, but it might work. The princess made a soft sound, and Jake looked up to find her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. She spoke again, her words musical and urgent. She says, Kelthvar translated reluctantly, that she would rather die trying something new than live forever as she is now. Jake met the princess's gaze, seeing determination and desperation in equal measure. Then, let's see if we can get you back on your feet. What followed was the most delicate work Jake had ever attempted. With Kelthvar providing technical translation and Mira monitoring the princess's vital signs, Jake began the painstaking process of integrating human jury-rigging with alien perfection. The interface connections were thinner than human hair, but carried more information than the rusty Comet's entire computer system. Jake's hands, steady from years of working on critical ship systems, made microscopic adjustments while his improvised amplifier gradually synchronized with the Valtherian technology. This is insane, Kelthvar muttered as Jake connected a device worth 50 credits to an interface that represented centuries of advancement. The harmonic frequencies aren't even compatible. That's why it might work, Jake said, his attention focused on the delicate connections. Your technology is so refined that it can't adapt to damage. Mine is so crude that it can work with almost anything. Hours passed in tense concentration. The princess's vital signs fluctuated as Jake's modifications took hold, and more than once Kelthvar had to intervene to prevent dangerous neural feedback. But gradually, impossibly, the chaotic interference patterns began to stabilize. Jake, Mira said suddenly, her voice tight with excitement. Look at the neural activity readings. On the holographic displays, patterns that had been random noise for 3 years were beginning to form coherent shapes. The princess's neural interface was beginning to communicate with the rest of her nervous system again. And then, for the first time in 3 years, Princess Zarthyss moved her hand. The movement was tiny, barely a twitch of her fingers, but in the silence of the medical chamber, it might as well have been thunder. Kelthvar stared at the readings in disbelief, while Mira laughed with relief and exhaustion. Jake sat back on his heels, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. Well, he said, that's a start. The princess's eyes filled with tears that looked like liquid diamonds as she slowly, carefully, raised her hand to touch Jake's face. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, but the gratitude in it transcended any language barrier. She says, Kelthvar translated, his own voice shaking with emotion, that you have given her back her life, and that the Empire will not forget this debt. But as Jake looked around the medical chamber, seeing the mixture of awe and fear on Kelthvar's face, he began to understand that fixing the princess might have been the easy part. The hard part would be dealing with the consequences. The celebration lasted exactly 47 minutes. Jake Morrison was admiring his handiwork, watching Princess Zarathustra slowly flex her fingers and rotate her wrists while Kelthvar ran increasingly excited scans. When the alarms began, they weren't the harsh mechanical alarms Jake was used to from human ships, but something far more unsettling, a harmonious chord that somehow conveyed mortal danger more effectively than any klaxon ever could. "What's happening?" Mira asked, but Kelthvar was already moving toward the chamber's communication panel with an urgency that made Jake's stomach drop. The physician's conversation with whoever was on the other end was brief and conducted in rapid Valtherian that Jake couldn't follow. But he didn't need translation to understand the fear in Kelthvar's voice or the way the princess's newly recovered hand clenched into a fist. "The Queen's Guard has arrived," Kelthvar said, turning back to them with an expression that mixed relief with terror. "They're demanding immediate access to this chamber." "Is that bad?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "The Queen's Guard answers only to the Empress herself," the princess said, her voice still weak, but carrying unmistakable authority. It was the first time she'd spoken in a language Jake could understand, and the effort of forming human words clearly cost her. "They were not informed of your presence here." Through the crystalline walls, Jake could see figures moving in the corridor outside, tall, imposing beings in armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved with the fluid precision of creatures born for war, and even through the sealed chamber, Jake could feel the weight of their attention. "We need to explain what happened," Mira said. "They'll understand that we were helping." Kelthvar's expression suggested otherwise. "The Queen's Guard are not known for their understanding nature. They are known for their efficiency in eliminating threats to the royal family." The chamber doors, which had opened silently for Kelthvar hours earlier, now began to glow with an ominous light. Jake could hear something that might have been cutting beams working at the crystalline material, and he had the sinking feeling that the guard weren't planning to knock politely. "Your Highness," Kelthvar said urgently, "you must speak for them. If the guard believes the humans are a threat." Princess Zarathustra struggled to sit up, her movements still unsteady but determined. The neural interface at the base of her skull flickered with new activity, and Jake felt a strange tingling in the air as she drew on psychic abilities that had been dormant for 3 years. "I can barely maintain consciousness," she said, exhaustion clear in her voice. "My psychic abilities are still fractured. The guard will not be easily convinced by words alone." The cutting sound stopped, and the sudden silence was somehow more threatening than the noise had been. Jake realized that whatever was about to happen, they were out of time for planning. "There's perhaps one option," Kelthvar said quietly, "but it would require the humans to accept considerable risk." "We're listening," Jake said, checking that his toolkit was still secure. In his experience, considerable risk usually meant they'd need to improvise quickly. "The Empress has been in deep meditation since the princess's accident," Kelthvar explained. "She blames herself for allowing the experimental interface to be tested. If the humans could somehow prove their value to the Empire beyond merely healing the princess." "What kind of value?" Mira asked. The doors began to glow white-hot as the Queen's Guard prepared to breach the chamber. Princess Zarathustra closed her eyes, gathering her strength, and when she opened them again, Jake saw a spark of the formidable intelligence that had made her heir to a galactic empire. "Our greatest warship," she said, "the one where my accident occurred. It has been dead in space for 3 years. Its neural interface system's too damaged for even our best technicians to repair. If you could restore it to functionality." "You want us to fix a warship?" Jake asked. "I'm a salvage operator, not a military engineer." "The principles would be similar to what you accomplished here," Kelthvar said as the doors began to buckle inward. neural interfaces, signal processing, system integration. But on a scale that encompasses an entire capital ship. The first of the Queen's Guard stepped through the breached doorway, and Jake's understanding of intimidation was fundamentally redefined. The warrior stood nearly 8 feet tall, its armor flowing like liquid shadow over a frame that suggested both incredible strength and impossible speed. Its face was hidden behind a helmet that seemed to be made from crystallized darkness, and when it spoke, its voice resonated with harmonics that vibrated in Jake's bones. The exchange that followed was tense and conducted entirely in Valtherian, but Jake didn't need translation to understand the dynamics. The guard captain was clearly angry about the presence of unknown aliens in the royal medical chambers. Princess Zara-THYSS was defending their actions while struggling to project authority from medical bed, and Kelfar was trying to mediate between duty and diplomacy. Finally, the princess raised her hand, the same hand that had been motionless for 3 years, and spoke with a strength that belied her physical condition. She has proposed a trial, Kelfar translated. The humans will be allowed to attempt repairs on the Imperial battleship Void's Edge. If they succeed, they will be granted safe passage and the gratitude of the Empire. If we fail, Mira prompted. The guard captain's helmet turned toward them, and even through the crystalline faceplate, Jake felt the weight of ancient judgment. If you fail, Kelfvar said quietly, the guard will execute you as enemies of the Empire, and your presence here will be erased from all records. Jake looked at Mira, reading the familiar combination of excitement and terror in her expression. It was the same look she'd worn when they decided to respond to the emergency beacon, and before that, when they'd chosen to board the derelict Martian cruiser that had nearly gotten them killed. Well, Jake said, hefting his toolkit with more confidence than he felt, I've never worked on a battleship before. Should be interesting. The journey to the Void's Edge was conducted under heavy escort, with guard ships flanking the rusty comet as they traveled through space that Jake was beginning to realize represented military secrets humanity had never imagined. The Valtherian fleet was vast beyond comprehension, with ships that moved like living things and weapons that could apparently reshape matter at the subatomic level. But when they arrived at the Void's Edge, Jake understood why even the advanced Valtherians had been unable to repair it. The battleship was a masterpiece of alien engineering, stretching for nearly 5 kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull was formed from the same crystalline materials as the Royal Palace, designed to channel and focus the psychic abilities of its crew into weapons and defenses that defied human understanding. But the damage was immediately apparent. Vast sections of the ship's surface flickered erratically between solid matter and something that looked like frozen lightning, and Jake's instruments detected energy readings that made no sense at all. The neural interface network was overloaded during the pirate attack. Captain Vexthal, the ship's commander, explained as they docked. Like all Valtherians, she was tall and elegant, but her bearing suggested centuries of military experience. When the princess attempted to use the damage system to coordinate the ship's defenses, the feedback surge didn't just damage her. It created cascading failures throughout the entire network. Jake studied the technical readouts that Vexthal provided, tried to make sense of technology that integrated quantum mechanics, psychic phenomena, and what appeared to be controlled pocket dimensions. The Void's Edge wasn't just a ship. It was a living extension of its crew's collective consciousness, requiring perfect harmony between biological neural networks and crystalline interface systems. The damage patterns are fractal, Mira observed, pointing to the cascading failure reports. Each damaged node created interference that damaged adjacent nodes, which created more interference, and so on. Exactly, Vexthal confirmed. Our repair attempts have focused on replacing individual damage components, but the interference patterns make it impossible to integrate new systems with the existing network. Jake walked through the ship's neural interface chambers, vast spaces lined with crystalline conduits that pulsed with erratic energy. The damage was more extensive than anything he'd seen, affecting not just the interface connections but the ship's basic systems: life support, propulsion, weapons, everything that made the Void's edge functional. "This isn't just about repairing connections," he said finally. "The whole network needs to be retuned to work around the interference. It's like trying to fix a symphony orchestra where half the instruments are playing in the wrong key." "That is an apt analogy," Captain Vexthal said. "But how do you propose to retune a network that encompasses 14,000 individual interface nodes across 5 kilometers of ship?" Jake grinned. The expression that Mira had learned meant he was about to attempt something that violated several laws of physics. "The same way we always fix impossible problems. We don't fix the system. We teach it to fix itself." What followed was 3 days of the most intense technical work Jake had ever attempted. Working with a team of Valtherian technicians who viewed his methods with equal parts fascination and horror, he began implementing a solution that was equal parts human stubbornness and alien sophistication. Instead of trying to repair each damaged interface node individually, Jake created what he called a harmonic template, a simplified version of his jury-rigged amplifier system that could be replicated throughout the ship's network. Each template was crude by Valtherian standards, built from components that could be manufactured quickly and integrated easily with existing systems. "You are essentially teaching our ship to speak with a different accent," Vexthal observed as Jake's team installed template after template throughout the ship's neural network. "Exactly," Jake said, his hands steady despite exhaustion as he made the final connections to the primary interface hub. "Your ship learned to communicate perfectly in one language. Now it needs to learn to communicate adequately in a language that works around the damage." The moment of truth came when they powered up the newly modified network for the first time. Jake stood in the ship's central command chamber, surrounded by Valtherian officers whose expressions ranged from skeptical to terrified, and activated the harmonic template system. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the ship's crystalline walls began to pulse with steady, synchronized light. Life support systems that had been offline for 3 years hummed to life. Navigation displays flickered and stabilized. And in the neural interface chambers, the chaotic interference patterns resolved into something that might not have been perfect harmony, but was definitely functional music. Captain Vexthal placed her hand on the ship's primary neural interface, her eyes closing as she established mental contact with the Void's edge systems. When she opened them, they were filled with tears and something that might have been awe. "It works," she whispered. "It actually works. The ship is alive again." Jake sagged against the support pillar, exhaustion hitting him like a physical blow. "Well," he said, "that's 2 impossible problems down. How many more can there be?" As if in answer to his question, alarms began sounding throughout the ship, not the harmonious tones of Valtherian alerts, but the harsh mechanical warnings of human distress beacons. And, according to the ship's newly functional sensors, the signals were coming from a human fleet that was approaching the Veil Nebula with weapons charged and intentions that looked decidedly hostile. Admiral Sarachin Vostok had been hunting pirates for 18 years, ever since they'd killed her family in a raid on the outer colonies. She commanded the largest battle fleet in human space, and her reputation for ruthless efficiency had made piracy a considerably less profitable career choice in most civilized systems. But the distress beacon from the Rusty Comet was personal. The signal had been broadcasting for 4 days before her fleet could reach the Veil Nebula, and the message was clear. The salvage ship was under attack by unknown hostiles in the restricted zone. The fact that the Rusty Comet belonged to her sister made the situation a family matter. "Admiral," her tactical officer reported, "were picking up massive energy signatures from inside the nebula. Whatever's in there has technology that makes our best ships look like rowboats." Admiral Chinvostok studied the sensor readings from her flagship's command deck, noting the impossible energy patterns and spatial distortions that characterized the Veil Nebula. For 2 centuries, human ships had avoided this region based on standing orders that had never been officially explained. But family trumped regulations. "Any sign of the Rusty Comet?" "Negative, Admiral. But the interference is making detailed scans impossible." We'll need to move deeper into the nebula to get accurate readings. She made the decision that would change the course of human-alien relations for centuries to come. All ships advance formation. Weapons charged, but not targeted. We're going in. Meanwhile, aboard the newly restored Void's Edge, Jake Morrison was discovering that fixing an alien battleship came with unexpected complications. The human fleet is broadcasting military identification codes, Captain Vexthal reported, her hand still connected to the ship's neural interface. They appear to be searching for something. They're searching for us, Mira said, studying the communication intercepts. That's Admiral Chinvostok's fleet. My sister. Jake stared at her. In 4 years of partnership, Mira had never mentioned having family in the military, let alone a sister who commanded battle fleets. Your sister is an admiral? It's complicated, Mira said, which Jake had learned was Mira speak for there's a story here that you're not going to like. The story, as it turned out, was that Mirachin wasn't just a down-on-her-luck merchant who joined Jake's salvage operation to rebuild her life. She was the daughter of a prominent military family who'd gone into merchant trading against their wishes, and, when her business had failed, she'd been too proud to ask for help. My sister thinks I was killed by pirates 4 years ago, Mira explained while Valtherian officers listened with increasingly alarmed expressions. The last message she received from my ship was a distress call from a pirate attack that I barely survived. So, when she received our emergency beacon, Jake said, understanding dawning, she thought I was being held prisoner by whoever lives in the Veil Nebula, Mira finished. And, knowing Sarah, she brought enough firepower to turn this entire region into radioactive dust. Captain Vexthal was conferring urgently with the Queen's Guard representatives who had remained aboard to monitor Jake's work. The conversation was tense and conducted in rapid Valtherian, but Jake caught enough words to understand that they were discussing something called Imperial Protocol 7, which didn't sound pleasant. Captain, Jake said, interrupting the conference, what exactly is Imperial Protocol 7? Vexthal's expression was grim. It is our response to armed incursion by primitive species. The human fleet has entered restricted space with weapons charged. Protocol 7 authorizes the use of any force necessary to eliminate the threat. Any force necessary, Jake repeated. What does that mean in practical terms? The Valtherian Empire has weapons capable of destabilizing stars, the guard captain said, its voice carrying the same harmonics that Jake had learned meant absolute certainty. Your human fleet will be given one opportunity to withdraw. If they refuse, they will be eliminated with such completeness that your species will believe they never existed. The scale of the impending disaster hit Jake like a physical blow. The most powerful human military force ever assembled was about to face technology that could literally erase them from history. And it was happening because his partner had neglected to mention that her family had abandonment issues. There has to be another way, he said. Some kind of diplomatic solution. Diplomacy requires mutual understanding, Vexthal said sadly. Your people do not even know we exist. How can we negotiate with beings who are not prepared for first contact? Jake looked around the command chamber of the alien battleship he'd just repaired, at the crystalline displays showing human ships advancing with weapons ready, and felt the weight of two civilizations balanced on the edge of destruction. Then, we make them ready, he said. Mira, can you open a channel to your sister's flagship? Jake, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that if we're going to prevent a war, we need to get both sides talking before they start shooting. The communication that followed was possibly the most awkward family reunion in galactic history. Admiral Chinvostok's image appeared on the Void's Edge's main display, her face cycling through surprise, relief, fury, and bewilderment in rapid succession as she took in her sister's surroundings. Mira, she said finally, when you disappeared 4 years ago, I imagined many possible fates. Being adopted by aliens was not among them. It's complicated, Sarah, Mira said, and Jake could hear decades of sibling dynamics in those 2 words. I have a fleet of 200 ships prepared to level this entire region to rescue you, Admiral Chinvostok said. Please tell me that complication doesn't require me to start an interstellar war. Jake stepped into view of the communication pickup, knowing that this moment would either save two civilizations or doom them both. Admiral, my name is Jake Morrison. I'm a salvage operator, and I need to explain some things that are going to sound impossible. What followed was the fastest introduction to galactic politics in human history. Jake explained the Valtherian Empire, their advanced technology, their peaceful intentions, and the fact that humanity had been unknowingly living next door to a civilization that could have conquered them at any time over the past several centuries. You're telling me, Admiral Chinvostok said slowly, that we've been protected by beings who could destroy our entire civilization with a thought, and they've chosen not to because they believe in some kind of galactic non-interference policy? That's a simplification, Captain Vexthal interjected, but essentially accurate. The Valtherian Empire has observed humanity's development with interest, but direct contact was considered premature. Until now, Jake added, your sister and I answer a medical emergency that couldn't be resolved through normal channels. And in the process, we've accidentally created the first official contact between our species. Admiral Chinvostok was quiet for a long moment, and Jake could almost hear her calculating the implications. Behind her, he could see the bridge of her flagship, with human officers staring at alien technology that redefined their understanding of the universe. The non-interference policy, she said finally. I assume it has exceptions. Self-defense being the primary one, the guard captain confirmed. Armed incursion into restricted space constitutes an act of war under Imperial law. And if I order my fleet to withdraw, then this incident can be resolved diplomatically, Captain Vexthal said, though the revelation of our existence to your people will require adjustments to existing arrangements. Jake could see the moment when Admiral Chinvostok made the decision that would shape humanity's future. Her expression shifted from military alertness to diplomatic calculation, and when she spoke again, it was with the authority of someone who had just become an accidental ambassador. Captain Vexthal, I am prepared to order my fleet to withdraw to a safe distance while we discuss terms for formal contact between our species. But I need assurances that my sister and Mr. Morrison will be treated as honored guests rather than prisoners. They have already earned that status through their service to the royal family, Vexthal assured her. Indeed, their actions have created a debt that the Empire will be honored to repay. The immediate crisis began to defuse as Admiral Chinvostok ordered her fleet to stand down, and Captain Vexthal transmitted similar orders to the approaching Valtherian ships. But Jake could see the larger implications forming like storm clouds on the horizon. This is just the beginning, isn't it? He said to Mira as they watched the two fleets arrange themselves in careful formations that suggested mutual respect rather than mutual destruction. First contact between species never goes smoothly, Mira agreed. There will be years of negotiations, cultural exchanges, trade agreements, and probably a few more near wars before things stabilize. Through the voids edge as crystalline walls, Jake could see both human and Valtherian ships moving in complex patterns that spoke to centuries of military tradition adapting to unprecedented circumstances. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. But as he watched the careful dance of two civilizations learning to coexist, Jake realized that the most dangerous part of this entire adventure was still ahead of them. Because somewhere in the depths of the Valtherian Empire, the Empress herself was awakening from her 3-year meditation, and she was about to learn that her daughter's cure had come at the price of revealing the Empire's existence to a species that was nowhere near ready for that knowledge. And according to Kelthvar, the Empress's reaction to unexpected developments was historically explosive. Empress Lara THYSS had not spoken to anyone in 3 years, for months and 17 days. She had been in deep meditation aboard her personal flagship, the Eternal Dawn, processing guilt and grief through mental disciplines that allowed Valtherians to achieve perfect clarity at the cost of complete isolation from the physical world. The meditation had begun the day her daughter was injured, and It was meant to end only when she had found a solution to the impossible choice between her duties as an empress and her failure as a mother. The fact that she was awakening now meant that something had changed, something significant enough to draw her consciousness back from the depths of imperial contemplation. The first thing she sensed was her daughter's neural signature, strong and clear for the first time in 3 years. The second thing she sensed was the presence of alien minds aboard the royal palace. Minds that felt crude and chaotic compared to Valtherian consciousness, but which burned with an intensity that spoke of uncommon determination. And the third thing she sensed was a human battle fleet positioned at the edge of her empire, their weapons powered down, but their intentions still echoing with the harmonics of barely restrained violence. Empress Lyra T2SS opened her eyes, and Jake Morrison felt the psychic pressure from 3 star systems away. "She knows," Princess Lyra T2SS said suddenly, her voice tight with an emotion that Jake was learning to recognize as filial terror. "My mother is awake, and she's not pleased." They were still aboard the Void's Edge, which had become an impromptu neutral ground for the negotiations between humanity and the Valtherian Empire. Admiral Chinvostok had come aboard with a small diplomatic team, and the sight of human military officers trying to navigate alien architecture while maintaining their dignity was providing what Jake suspected might be his last moments of amusement for quite some time. "Define not pleased," he said, though he suspected he didn't want to hear the answer. "The last time my mother was awakened unexpectedly from deep meditation," the princess said, "she relocated an entire solar system to demonstrate her displeasure." "Relocated," Mira repeated. "As in moved it to a different place?" "As in removed it from this dimension entirely," Captain Vexthal confirmed. "The Epsilon Draconis system now exists in what your physics would call a pocket universe, where it will remain until the Empress decides their offense has been sufficiently contemplated." Jake felt that familiar sinking sensation that had become his personal indicator of problems spiraling beyond his control. And what was their offense? They interrupted her meditation with a request for trade negotiations. The silence that followed was broken by Admiral Chinvostok, who had been listening to the exchange with the expression of someone watching her entire worldview collapse in real time. "Are you telling me that we're dealing with a being who can remove solar systems from reality when she's in a bad mood?" "The Empress is the most powerful psychic in the known galaxy," Kelthvar explained with the patience of someone who had dealt with alien confusion before. "Her abilities, when amplified by the Empire's technology, allow her to manipulate matter and energy on a scale that approaches the theoretical limits of what is physically possible. And she's about to arrive here to discuss our little first contact situation," Jake said. It wasn't a question. As if summoned by his words, space itself began to ripple around the Void's Edge. The effect was unlike anything Jake had seen, as if reality was being folded like origami to allow something impossibly large to fit into a space that should have been too small to contain it. The eternal dawn materialized with the gradual majesty of sunrise, its hull formed from materials that seemed to contain actual starlight. The ship was beautiful in a way that redefined Jake's understanding of engineering as art, but its presence made the space around it feel small and constrained, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. "She's requesting immediate transport to the palace," Captain Vexthal reported, though request seemed like an inadequate word for whatever communication she'd received. "All involved parties are to be present for Imperial judgment." Jake looked around the command chamber at the collection of humans and aliens who had stumbled into rewriting galactic history, and realized that they were all about to face the consequences of their improvised diplomacy. The throne room of the Valtherian royal palace was designed to inspire awe, and it succeeded beyond Jake's ability to process. The chamber was vast enough to contain a small city, with walls that seemed to extend infinitely upward into spaces that bent the laws of perspective. The throne itself appeared to be carved from a single crystal that contained what looked like a trapped galaxy, and the air hummed with energies that made Jake's teeth ache. Empress Lyra T2SS entered like a force of nature given form. She was tall even by Valtherian standards, with features that combined authority and beauty in proportions that suggested centuries of selective breeding for leadership. Her robes flowed around her like liquid space, and when she moved, reality seemed to adjust itself to accommodate her presence. But it was her eyes that made Jake understand why entire civilizations had submitted to Valtherian rule without resistance. They held depths that spoke of power that could reshape worlds, intelligence that had solved problems across galactic timescales, and a fury that was currently focused on the collection of beings who had forced her to abandon her meditation. Princess Zara Thyss knelt immediately, her movements still unsteady but filled with respect that bordered on worship. The other Valtherians followed her example, leaving Jake, Mira, and Admiral Chinvostok standing awkwardly in a sea of alien reverence. When the Empress spoke, her voice contained harmonics that Jake felt in his bones. The words were in Valtherian, but somehow their meaning was clear, a demand for explanation that carried the weight of absolute authority. "Honored Empress," Captain Vexthal said, rising slowly from her prostration. "These humans responded to our medical emergency when all other options had failed. They restored your daughter to health through methods that our greatest physicians could not achieve." The Empress's gaze shifted to Jake, and he felt his consciousness being examined by an intelligence that had ruled star systems before humanity had discovered agriculture. It was not a comfortable experience. "The mechanic," she said, her accent strange but understandable. "You are the one who repaired what could not be repaired." "Yes, Your Majesty," Jake said, deciding that honesty was probably his only viable strategy. Though I should mention that it wasn't exactly a standard medical procedure. Indeed, the Empress moved closer, her presence filling Jake's awareness like a gravitational field. "Show me your methods." What followed was possibly the most surreal technical demonstration in galactic history. With the Empress of the most advanced civilization in the known galaxy watching intently, Jake explained the principles behind his jury-rigged amplifier system, using his toolkit to illustrate the difference between elegant precision and functional improvisation. "Your approach ignores established theory," the Empress observed. "It violates principles that we consider fundamental to neural interface technology." "Sometimes," Jake said, "ignoring established theory is exactly what you need to solve an impossible problem. Sometimes the solution that works is more important than the solution that should work." The Empress was quiet for a long moment, her attention focused on Jake's crude but effective equipment. When she spoke again, there was something new in her voice, a quality that might have been respect. "You achieved in hours what our greatest minds could not accomplish in years," she said. "And you did so using principles so simple that we dismiss them as inadequate." "With respect, Your Majesty," Jake said, "sometimes the most advanced solution is too sophisticated to handle damage. Sometimes you need something that can work around problems instead of trying to eliminate them." The Empress turned to her daughter, who had remained kneeling throughout the exchange. "Rise, daughter. Tell me of your experiences with these humans." Princess Zara Thyss stood slowly, her movements gaining strength with each moment. "They asked for nothing beyond the satisfaction of helping someone in need," she said. "When offered rewards, they requested only safe passage home. They risked their lives to help beings they had never met, of a species they had never encountered. And their presence here has forced first contact between our civilizations centuries before we deemed humanity ready," the Empress said. But her tone suggested analysis rather than accusation. Admiral Chinvostok stepped forward, her military bearing intact despite the impossibility of her surroundings. "Your Majesty, humanity may not be ready for contact with your empire, but we're adaptable. We can learn." The Empress studied the human admiral with the same intensity she directed at Jake. "Your species has a reputation for violence and territorial expansion. Why should we believe that contact will not result in conflict?" "Because," Admiral Chinvostok said, "my sister and Mr. Morrison have just demonstrated that humans are capable of prioritizing help over profit, cooperation over conquest." We have our flaws, but we also have our virtues. The Empress was quiet for so long that Jake began to wonder if she'd returned to her meditative state. Finally, she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of decisions that would shape galactic civilization for centuries. The Empire will establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity, she announced. Contact will be gradual, managed through selected intermediaries who understand both cultures. Trade will be limited initially, focusing on technologies that will benefit both species without creating dangerous imbalances. The relief in the throne room was palpable, but the Empress wasn't finished. The humans Jake Morrison and Mira-chan will serve as cultural liaisons, she continued. They have proven their ability to find solutions that transcend traditional thinking. This empire has need of such perspectives. Jake felt the weight of galactic responsibility settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. Your Majesty, I'm just a salvage operator. I fix broken things for a living. The Empress's expression might have been amusement on a human face. Mr. Morrison, you have just repaired the relationship between two civilizations. I suspect that broken starships will seem simple by comparison. As Jake looked around the throne room at the mixture of humans and aliens who were all trying to process the magnitude of what they'd just accomplished, he realized that his days of simple salvage work were probably over. But when Princess HFY smiled at him with gratitude that transcended species barriers, when he saw Admiral Chinvostok and Captain Vexthau beginning to plan cultural exchange programs, when he noticed Mira looking at their impossible situation with the expression she reserved for profitable opportunities, Jake thought that maybe fixing impossible things on a galactic scale might not be the worst way to spend his life. After all, the universe was full of broken things that needed fixing, and apparently it was also full of beings willing to help if you just asked the right way. And sometimes that was all the hope anyone really needed. 3 months later, Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the new Earth Valtherian Embassy Station, watching human and alien ships moving in careful coordination through space that had once been forbidden to his species. His official title was Senior Technical Liaison for Innovative Solutions, which he'd learned was diplomatic speak for the guy who fixes things that shouldn't be fixable. Mira had taken to the diplomatic life with the enthusiasm of someone who'd finally found a business opportunity worthy of her talents. Princess HFY visited regularly, her strength fully recovered, and her curiosity about human engineering methods apparently inexhaustible. And Admiral Chinvostok had become the unofficial military liaison between species, a role that seemed to suit her pragmatic approach to impossible situations. The Rusty Comet sat in the station's main docking bay, retrofitted with Valtherian technology that made it one of the most advanced ships in human space, while somehow maintaining its essential character as a vessel held together by determination and duct tape. As Jake watched a human freighter receive escort from Valtherian patrol ships, he reflected on the strange turns that life could take when you were willing to help someone in need. Sometimes the most important repairs weren't to machines or technology, but to the connections between beings who had forgotten they shared the same universe. And sometimes the best solution to an impossible problem was to remember that impossible was just another word for nobody's tried the right approach yet.